I didn't suspect him because there was nothing suspicious about the way he loved me. That's the most dangerous part. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening, ordinary enough to be forgettable. Daniel was showering, his phone vibrating softly on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping. I never had. But the screen lit up with a notification. No name, just a code. Numbers and letters. Too clean. Too intentional. I told myself it was work. I always told myself it was work. My name is Isabel Cruz. I'm 32 years old, legally documented, carefully invisible. I work in compliance for a logistics firm, paperwork, audits, systems. I believe in rules, in procedures, in doing things the right way, even when no one is watching. Daniel Moore was the opposite and the same. He was an IC agent, though he never said it like that. He said he worked federal, said it casually like a man mentioning the weather. Tall, disciplined, calm in a way that made you feel safe, as if nothing bad could happen while he was in the room. We met 3 years ago at a coffee shop near Union Station. He noticed my accent before my face. I noticed his silence before his smile. He listened more than he spoke. When he asked questions, they felt thoughtful, precise, like he wanted to understand me deeply. I thought that was love. That night, after the shower, he wrapped a towel around his waist and kissed my forehead. "You're quiet," he said. "Just tired." He nodded, always nodding, always accepting answers without pushing. At least, that's what I believed back then. Later, as he slept, I stared at the ceiling and replayed our conversations from the past few months. Small things surfaced. Questions that no boyfriend should need answers to. How often do you speak to your uncle in Texas? Did your mother ever adjust her status, or was it automatic? You've never had issues at ports of entry, right? I had answered them all, smiling, trusting, proud even that my life was so clean. That's when it hit me. Daniel never talked about our future. No plans. No someday. No shared horizon. I wasn't in his tomorrow. I was in his present, contained, useful, temporary. The next morning I did something new. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't pull away. I paid attention. When he kissed me goodbye, I counted the seconds. When he texted, I noted the timing. When he asked questions, I memorized the phrasing. Not the meaning, the structure. That's when I realized something chilling. Daniel didn't ask like a man in love. He asked like a man building a file. And I was no longer afraid. Because once you understand the system, you understand its weakness. If Daniel was writing a report, then so was I. I just hadn't told him yet. And the most dangerous files are the ones written in silence. I didn't become careful overnight. Carefulness is loud. It makes noise inside your head. It changes the way you breathe, the way you blink. Daniel would have noticed. Instead, I became normal. I laughed at the same moments. I complained about traffic. I asked him what he wanted for dinner. I stayed exactly the woman he thought he already knew. Because men like Daniel don't fear women they believe they understand. They fear anomalies. The questions continued, but now I heard them differently. They arrived disguised as concern. "You seemed tense when you talked about your cousin," he said one night, scrolling through his tablet. "Everything okay there?" I shrugged. He's always been dramatic. Daniel smiled, not relieved, satisfied. Satisfied was the wrong reaction. A concerned lover presses for comfort. An investigator confirms a data point and moves on. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened my laptop and began doing something I hadn't done in years. I organized dates, conversations, locations, not emotional recollections, structures. I built a private timeline the way compliance officers do when they're preparing for an audit. I listed every question Daniel had asked me since the beginning of our relationship. There were more than I remembered. Many more. They clustered around immigration status, travel history, extended family, financial irregularities. Always indirect. Always polite. Always framed as curiosity. Never once did he ask me what scared me. Never once did he ask what I wanted to become. 2 weeks later, Daniel invited me to dinner with his colleagues. That alone should have raised alarms. In 3 years, I had met exactly one person from his professional life, a woman named Claire, who worked in administration and never asked me a single personal question. She smiled too much, watched too carefully. The restaurant was upscale, neutral, the kind of place designed to forget conversations. Daniel introduced me simply. This is Isabel. No last name. At the table were 3 men and 1 woman. Federal posture, military shoulders, clean hands, clean nails, clean eyes that didn't blink when they studied me. They asked about my job. I answered in generalities. They nodded in unison. One of the men leaned forward. Logistics compliance? That must mean you're familiar with documentation discrepancies. Yes, I said carefully. Mostly errors. Sometimes intent. The woman smiled. And how do you tell the difference? I met her eyes. Patterns. Daniel's hand tightened briefly around my knee under the table. That was the first time he touched me during the dinner. On the drive home, he was quiet. You didn't enjoy tonight, I said lightly. He hesitated. They can be intense. I smiled into the darkness. So are you? That earned a laugh. A real one. The tension lifted. I realized something then. Daniel didn't suspect me because he didn't believe I was capable of suspicion. Power creates blindness. The shift happened subtly after that. Daniel began volunteering information. Small things. Harmless things. Or so he thought. Internal reviews are a nightmare, he muttered one night. All it takes is one inconsistency, and suddenly your entire career is under a microscope. I looked up from my book. Sounds exhausting. It is, especially when people don't understand context. Context. Another word investigators love. I asked, do they happen often? He shook his head. Only when something flags. What kind of thing flags? I asked as if idly curious. He paused. I waited. Finally, he said, conflicting timelines. Unverified sources. Personal involvement. Personal involvement. I didn't react. I never reacted anymore. But inside, something aligned perfectly into place. That night, I dreamed of files stacked to the ceiling. Each folder was labeled with a name. Most were closed. Some were redacted. One was open. It had no title, just a photograph clipped to the inside cover. Daniel. I stopped answering certain questions. Not obviously. Not dramatically. I answered around them. When he asked how often I sent money to my aunt, I spoke about inflation. When he asked about my mother's citizenship, I talked about her garden. When he asked about travel dates, I confused the order, slightly. Nothing incorrect, just inconsistent. It felt dangerous at first, like walking on glass. But Daniel didn't react. He adapted. He asked again later in a different way. That's when I knew. He wasn't asking for clarity. He was checking stability. 3 months after the first code appeared on his phone, Daniel forgot his access card at home. I'll be late, he said over the phone. Don't wait up. I waited. At midnight, I heard the soft beep of his tablet unlocking. He must have left it charging on the desk. I didn't touch it. Instead, I watched the screen light up from across the room. A document opened automatically. Red banner at the top. Classification level I recognized from compliance training, though I had never seen it applied to a person. Restricted internal use only. Below it, a heading. Subject D. Moore. I didn't read further. I didn't need to, because now I understood the shape of the truth. Daniel wasn't building a case with me. He was building one through me. And somewhere along the way, the system had begun watching him instead. When Daniel came home at 2:14 a.m., I pretended to be asleep. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Longer than usual. I could feel his eyes on me, not warm, not protective. Measuring. That was the moment I stopped being afraid. Fear belongs to people who don't understand the rules. I did. And Daniel had made one fatal mistake. He had taught me how he thinks. In systems like his, trust is irrelevant. Only consistency matters. And I had just learned exactly how to break his, without ever touching a law. The file wasn't finished yet, but it was already writing itself. And my name was nowhere on the cover. By the time Daniel began to relax, I had already become invisible again. That was the trick. People think invisibility means absence. It doesn't. It means predictability. I woke up at the same hour. I made coffee the same way. I asked about his day with the same soft curiosity. I kissed him before work, lingered half a second longer than necessary, just enough to feel intimate, just enough to feel real. I became the safest variable in his life. And once I was safe, he stopped watching me. Daniel started leaving files open. Not deliberately, never deliberately, but men who believe they are in control develop careless habits. They underestimate silence. They confuse calm with ignorance. One evening, while he showered, his phone buzzed again on the counter. Another code. This time I memorized it. Not the numbers, the format. 8 characters, 2 letters, 6 digits. The same structure I'd seen before. The same structure used by internal task routing systems in federal agencies. I knew that because compliance is just another word for controlled curiosity. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to, because once you recognize a pattern, you no longer need access. Daniel began telling me stories about work. Not details, never details, but narratives. There's this case, he said one night, pouring whiskey he rarely drank. A mess. Everyone involved thinks they're smarter than the system. Are they? I asked. He smiled thinly. Nobody is. I tilted my head. Not even you. He laughed. Especially not me. That laugh stayed with me long after he fell asleep. People who say that don't mean it. They say it because they want to believe the system itself is incorruptible. That even if they bend the rules will bend back into place around them. Daniel trusted the system the way religious people trust God. He never considered that faith itself could be audited. The first external shift came quietly. He started checking his email more often, closing his laptop faster, reading messages twice. One morning he asked, "Have you ever been contacted by anyone asking questions about me?" I didn't look up from my cereal. Why would they? He shrugged. Routine stuff. Federal routine. I asked, smiling. He smiled back. Exactly. That night, I updated my private timeline. Entry 47. First confirmation of internal pressure. Subject displays defensive curiosity. I slept better than I had in months. The second shift came from Claire. She texted me unexpectedly. Coffee sometime? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Sure. We met at a cafe far from Daniel's usual routes. Claire arrived early, already seated, already watching the door. She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. She didn't waste time. You seem happy, she said. I am, I replied. She studied my face. Daniel can be intense. He's focused, I said carefully. Claire nodded. Focus has a cost. I waited. She leaned in slightly. If anyone ever asks you questions about Daniel, about your relationship, just answer honestly. I met her gaze. Is that advice or concern? She smiled, thin and professional. Both. That was when I understood Claire's role. She wasn't here to protect Daniel. She was here to measure collateral. And she had just confirmed something crucial. The system was no longer looking outward. It was looking inward. Daniel began losing sleep. He woke up at night, checked the time, stared at the ceiling. He became irritable, then apologetic. He asked me if I was okay more often, not because he cared, but because he needed reassurance that I hadn't changed. I became warmer, kinder, more available. I cooked his favorite meals. I listened without interrupting. I touched him when he spoke, grounding him, reminding him of normalcy. The more pressure he felt, the more he clung to me. That's how covers work. They don't draw attention. They absorb it. One evening, Daniel said something he had never said before. "If anything ever happened," he began casually, "you'd be okay, right?" I turned to him. "What do you mean?" "Just hypothetically." I smiled. "I've always been okay." He exhaled slowly. "You're stronger than you think." That wasn't admiration. That was assessment. 2 weeks later, he stopped bringing work home entirely. No more stories. No more files. No more slips. That worried me more than anything else, because withdrawal means containment. I adjusted. I introduced micro-variations into my behavior. Slight inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remain human. Untrackable. Real. Daniel noticed. "You've been distracted lately," he said. "Am I?" I asked. He nodded. "A little." "Maybe I'm just tired of being predictable," I said lightly. He stared at me for a moment too long, then smiled. "Aren't we all?" The call came on a Sunday morning. Daniel stepped outside to take it. He didn't close the door fully. I heard my name, not spoken, referenced. That was enough. When he came back in, his face was blank. "They want to talk to you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Who's they?" "Internal review," he replied. "Routine. About me?" "About us." I nodded slowly. "Okay." He watched me carefully. I didn't ask questions. I didn't panic. I trusted the system because I understood exactly how it worked. The interview was brief. 2 people. Neutral room. Neutral tone. They asked about timelines. About introductions. About inconsistencies. I answered honestly. Not emotionally. Precisely. Truth, when delivered without intent, is devastating. They thanked me for my cooperation. Daniel picked me up afterward. His hands shook slightly on the steering wheel. "You did great," he said. "I know," I replied. That night he didn't touch me. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel stopped talking about the future altogether. He became cautious in a way that felt internal, like a man already negotiating loss. One evening, as he packed a bag for a conference, I watched from the doorway. "You're not coming back the same," I said softly. He froze. "What?" I smiled. "Just a feeling." He studied me as if seeing me for the first time. Then he said something that almost made me pity him. "You were never supposed to be this complicated." I stepped closer. "Neither were you." The next morning, Daniel left before dawn. I stood at the window and watched his car disappear. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. I felt completion. Because the perfect cover doesn't survive exposure. It disappears before the collapse. And somewhere in a file I would never see, a pattern had finally stabilized. Not around me. Around him. The system doesn't punish betrayal. It punishes inconsistency. And Daniel Moore had become one. The file was almost finished. And I was already gone. I didn't leave the apartment right away. That would have been too dramatic. Too emotional. Too human. Instead, I stayed for 3 more days. I washed the sheets. I watered the plants Daniel always forgot. I folded the clothes he left behind with the same precision he once admired in me. I erased nothing. I added nothing. Systems notice absence. They don't notice continuity. On the 4th morning, I packed a single suitcase and walked out without looking back. The city felt different when I was no longer being observed. Not safer. Not freer. Just quieter. I moved into a short-term rental under my full legal name. No aliases, no evasions. I updated my address with my employer. I changed nothing that could be interpreted as flight. Flight implies guilt. I had none. 2 weeks later, Claire called. Her voice was polite, controlled, neutral. "They've reassigned Daniel." I said nothing. "That's usually temporary," she added. "Pending review." "Usually," I replied. There was a pause. Then, carefully, "They may want to speak to you again." "Of course," I said. I'll make myself available. She hesitated. You understand this isn't personal. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Nothing in systems ever is. The second interview was different. Longer. Sharper. They asked about emotional dynamics this time. Power imbalances. Consent. Influence. They asked whether Daniel had ever pressured me for information. I answered with the truth. No. They looked surprised. He never pressured me, I continued calmly. He made it easy to volunteer. Silence filled the room. That sentence mattered. Because systems aren't built to punish malice. They're built to correct process failure. And Daniel's failure wasn't what he did. It was how casually he did it. Daniel texted me for the first time since he left. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied. About what? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. About us. I almost laughed. There was no us left. Only overlapping timelines that no longer aligned. I don't think that's appropriate, I wrote. Given the circumstances, that was compliance language. He didn't respond. Weeks passed. Rumors surfaced quietly, the way institutional rumors always do, without attribution, without confirmation. Daniel had been pulled from fieldwork. Daniel's clearance was under review. Daniel had failed to disclose personal proximity risks. None of it was explosive. None of it was dramatic. That's how real consequences work. They erode. One afternoon, as I left my office, I saw him across the street. Daniel looked smaller. Not physically. Internally. His posture had changed. The confidence had drained from the way he occupied space. He saw me at the same moment. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he crossed the street. I didn't know where else to find you, he said. I didn't step back. I didn't step forward. You shouldn't be here, I said. I just want to understand, he insisted. When did this start? I tilted my head. What? This, whatever this is, he said, frustration breaking through the restraint. You changed. No, I replied gently. You noticed. He flinched. I loved you, he said. I met his eyes. You studied me. That's not fair. It's accurate. Silence stretched between us. Then he asked the question that told me everything. Did you plan this? I shook my head. Systems don't need planning. They need exposure. His jaw tightened. You knew what you were doing. I knew what you were doing, I corrected. I simply stopped compensating for it. Daniel's voice dropped. They're dismantling my career. I felt something then. Not satisfaction. Closure. You dismantled it, I said, when you blurred your boundaries. He laughed bitterly. You're acting like I committed a crime. You didn't, I agreed. You committed a flaw. That scared him more than any accusation. He reached out, then stopped himself. Was any of it real? He asked quietly. I considered lying. Lies would have been easier. Yes, I said instead. That's why this worked. He closed his eyes. I stepped back. Goodbye, Daniel. He didn't follow me. He couldn't. People like him are trained to pursue threats. I was no longer one. Months later, Claire sent a final message. Review concluded. Outcome irreversible. No details. None were needed. I deleted the message and shut down the private timeline I had kept for over a year. The file was closed. I changed jobs, changed cities, not to disappear, but to realign. Life without observation feels strange at first, directionless. Then it feels honest. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how easily this could have gone differently. If I had screamed, if I had exposed him publicly, if I had tried to destroy him, that would have made me visible. Instead, I let the system do what it was designed to do, correct itself. I never heard from Daniel again, but I heard about him. Teaching, consulting, no clearance, no access, no authority. A man who once believed he was invisible to scrutiny, now permanently aware of it. That was enough. Love doesn't end with betrayal. It ends when you stop protecting someone from the consequences of who they are. And I had finally stepped out of the way. The system took care of the rest. The last thing the system sent me was silence. No follow-up. No satisfaction survey. No acknowledgement that my name had ever crossed their desks. That was how I knew it was over. Systems don't say goodbye. They simply stop looking. A year passed. I moved again, this time not because I needed distance, but because I wanted light. I chose a city by the water, one that didn't ask questions and didn't remember people for long. I rented an apartment with wide windows and no shadows deep enough to hide in. I built a life that didn't require explanation. Morning walks. Work that ended on time. Friends who knew nothing about my past and didn't feel entitled to it. I stopped checking reflections behind me. Stopped measuring my words. Freedom isn't loud. It's uneventful. And for the first time, that was enough. Sometimes, though, the past resurfaced in unexpected ways. A news article about policy changes. A podcast discussing internal oversight failures. A familiar phrase, procedural breach, spoken by someone who had never lived inside one. Each time, I felt the same calm detachment, like reading about a storm that had already passed. I never searched for Daniel. That mattered. Searching would have meant unfinished business. But the world has a way of offering closure when you no longer seek it. I saw him one afternoon in an online panel discussion. His name listed among consultants, not agents. He looked older, not aged, weathered, as if he had learned something he hadn't wanted to. He spoke carefully, slowly, about ethics, about boundaries. He never mentioned me. He didn't have to. The people who listened to him believed he had arrived at those conclusions intellectually. I knew better. That night, I dreamed of files again, but this time they were empty. Blank folders stacked neatly, waiting for names that would never be written. I woke with a strange sense of gratitude, not for what had happened, but for what hadn't. Months later, I received a letter. No return address. Typed. Precise. Familiar. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a response. I only wanted to say this. You were right about one thing. I thought I understood the system. I didn't understand myself. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not to preserve it, to neutralize it. I never replied. Some conversations don't end with answers. They end with boundaries. People ask me now why I left my last job, why I never talk about my longest relationship, why I'm so comfortable with uncertainty. I smile. Some stories, I say, aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be processed. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. The truth is simpler. I learned that love, when mixed with power, becomes surveillance. That trust, when assumed, becomes leverage. And that revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like stepping aside and letting gravity do its work. Every system believes it can contain human complexity. Every person who believes that eventually becomes a liability. Daniel did. I didn't. That difference mattered. Occasionally, I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen differently. If I had confronted him. If I had left the moment I understood. If I had tried to win in a way people recognize. The answer is always the same. I would have become visible. And visibility is a currency I no longer trade in. One evening, as the sun set over the water, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No code. No identifier. Just a message. Are you still Isabel Cruz? I stared at it for a long time. The name felt familiar and distant at the same time, like a file label that no longer corresponded to its contents. I typed a reply. Yes. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No follow-up. I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket. Somewhere, a system may still be running queries. Somewhere, someone may still be looking for patterns. But they won't find me. Because the most dangerous thing a system can encounter isn't rebellion. It's resolution. I walked along the shore until the light faded completely. Tomorrow I would wake up, go to work, live my life. No aliases, no cover stories, no file attached. And if someday the past knocks again, wearing a new badge, a new voice, a new question, I will answer honestly, not because I owe anyone the truth, but because I no longer need to protect it. The file is closed, but the lesson remains. And that, unlike systems, is something no one can ever take from me.